Fallen Angel, a cross-security investigation, Book 1. Written by G.k.Parks. Narrated by Danny Holt. Chapter 1. Don't be shy. I gave the red-headed woman at the door my most engaging smile. I won't bite.
No,
She looked uncertainly at my secretary.
I made a mistake. I got the wrong office.
The black stenciling on the frosted glass was impossible to mistake. Cross Security and Investigations. I thought I was clever using the initials CSI. So far, no one else seemed to think so, but it'd catch on. Unless Jerry Bruckheimer sued me, then it would really catch on. Are you sure? The dark bruises on her upper arm and the poorly executed attempt to cover her split lip and black eye didn't go by unnoticed.
Yeah, sorry to bother you.
She hesitated, like a deer caught in the headlights, frozen and unsure if she should run. I stood and grabbed my jacket, slipping it on over my crisp white shirt, a remnant of my brief stint working on Wall Street. No bother at all. She didn't need charming. She needed a friend, someone she could trust. I was just about to grab some coffee. I shook off my receptionist's questioning look. The last thing I needed was for her to mention the espresso machine in the back room. Can I help you find the right office?
No.
The redhead stumbled backward, afraid. I tried the smile again, more subdued and less engaging this time. I didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. How about you let me buy you a cup of coffee instead? She shook her head. I should have given up. Obviously, she changed her mind. If she didn't want my help, I couldn't force it on her. Domestic issues were sticky, but her bruises made my blood boil. Suit yourself. I turned to my assistant. Have our calls forwarded to the service. Since this young lady doesn't need our help, I say we cut out early tonight.
Are there any special messages you want relayed if the commissioner calls?
There were plenty of things I wanted to say to that bastard, but none of them were polite to repeat in front of mixed company. No.
Very good, sir.
Justin picked up the phone and pressed a few keys. The woman lingered just outside the doorway. I glanced at her from the corner of my eye as I stepped into the corridor. Are you sure there isn't something I can do for you? But the question only agitated her more. I cleared my throat. How rude of me. I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Lucien Cross.
Jade McNamara,
she said out of habit. Nice to meet you. I pushed the button for the elevator. Are you sure I can't buy you a cup of coffee?
I don't know. Maybe.
I nodded and politely gestured at the open elevator doors. She stepped inside, tucking herself into the rear corner. I stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby, keeping as much distance between us as possible in the hopes it would make her more comfortable. Were you looking for King Realtors?
No.
Her eyebrows pinched together.
Why would you think that?
I bought my office space from them. I shook my head, realizing I wasn't making much sense. They used to occupy the space I'm in now. Come to think of it, they also sold me the property.
Oh, good for you.
She picked at the peeling polish on her thumbnail.
Do you get a commission for recommending them?
I laughed. No. I turned my head, watching as she continued to stare at her nails on the floor. But since you weren't looking for me, I thought maybe you were looking for them. She didn't say anything. I only hung my shingle a few weeks ago. This security and investigation thing was new to me. Sure, I had business savvy and plenty of thoughts and ideas on how to make it work. I planned to specialize in corporate clients. My business background and trader status had led to a lot of contacts. I already had a list of clients lined up who needed employee background checks, security details for CEOs, and advice on internet protections. I was set. Cross Security would take off soon enough. I didn't actually need to investigate anything. But I wanted to, as a matter of pride. Until now, I never had a walk-in. If I were smart, I'd let her walk away. This wasn't my area of expertise, but it could be. I was nothing if not a go-getter. Did you file a police report? Her gaze shot up, the panic evident with the clenching of her jaw and barely contained tremor.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The bruises around your eye and that split lip say otherwise.
I fell.
Is that how you got marks on your arm made by someone's fingers? He was just helping you up, right?" She tugged on her sleeve, wishing she wore long sleeves instead.
How did you even see that?
"I notice things. That's why it's Cross Security and Investigations." My private investigator license application was pending, but she didn't need to know that. Idly, I wondered about the legal ramifications of taking a case without being licensed. I'd have to call my attorney in the morning, but since I fulfilled the requirements, including the apprenticeship and training, I didn't think it would matter. I'd be approved, there was no doubt about it. The elevator doors opened.
"I should go."
She beelined out of the car. "Ms. McNamara, wait. I didn't mean to upset you. Please, let me buy you a cup of coffee." She spun, halfway between the elevator and the front door.
"I don't need your help."
I stared into her eyes. "You need someone's help. That's why you came to my office today. Let's talk about it." She turned back around, intent on getting as far away from me as possible. "There's a shelter on 8th. If you won't let me help you, at least let them help you." She stopped in her tracks. Building security and a few business people stared at us. This wasn't a good way to conduct myself in public. I should have stayed in my office.
"I can't go there,"
she said, facing away from me.
"He'll find me."
Chapter 2. Are you sure you don't want a cookie? Jade had been eyeing the giant rainbow chip cookies since the moment we stepped into the cafe. She shook her head, reaching for her cup, which rattled against the saucer as she lifted it. Getting her to agree to coffee had been like pulling teeth, so convincing her to eat a cookie or a sandwich was out of the question. I slipped the barista a couple of 20s with the understanding that she'd check on us periodically and refill our mugs. Leaving Jade unattended would cause her to bolt, and I didn't want that to happen until I heard her story. "Isn't this lovely weather we're having?" I hoped to get her talking. She had shut down as soon as we stepped foot inside the coffee shop. She stared at me over the rim of her mug.
"Sure, I guess."
I ran a hand through my hair, realizing I'd done it a dozen times in the last 10 minutes. "Do you think I should shave my head?"
"What?"
she sputtered. I shrugged. I obviously have a nervous tic. Maybe it would alleviate the problem, but I would turn into one of those guys who rubs his head all the time. I could always just carry a towel and polish my head like a bowling ball. Her eyes lit up, and her lips quirked in the corners. Either she thought I was insane, or she was amused.
"What the hell's wrong with you?"
"Plenty." She sobered.
"Me too."
"Do you want to tell me about it?" "About him?" She looked around the room, making sure no one was within earshot or paying any attention to us.
"I moved here for graduate school. Criminal justice, of all things."
She snorted.
"Isn't that fucking ironic?"
She fell silent, so I waited her out. Finally, I gestured to the barista and asked for a cookie. Even if Jade didn't want one, I needed something to do to pass the time. Patience wasn't my strong suit. I wanted things done now. Maybe that was the downside of spending 2 years on the trading floor. But I suspected that flaw wasn't because of my previous profession. It was just who I was, and I had grown accustomed to getting what I wanted when I wanted it. I broke the cookie in half and took a bite.
"How long ago was that?"
5 years. She eyed the remaining piece of cookie, so I pushed the plate closer to her.
"That's how I met him. At first, things were great. He was great. Attentive and funny. Everything a girl could ever want and more. But something happened, and he changed. The first time..."
She bit her lip and stared at the espresso maker.
"He said he was sorry. He promised it wouldn't happen again, and for the next 4 months it didn't."
"That's what they all say," I mumbled. "How long have you two been together?"
3.5 years. I met him while researching my thesis. He let me do a ride-along."
She blinked, taking a deep breath. "He's a cop?"
"A sergeant."
"The police department takes allegations of domestic abuse seriously. Have you filed a complaint?"
"No."
"That's the first thing you should do." I wiped my hands on a napkin and reached for my phone. "Have you called 911 for help?"
"No."
I tried to recall everything I'd been taught. "What about doctor's visits or trips to the ER? Did you have any of these injuries documented?"
"No, I don't have insurance, and it's never been that bad."
I stared at her. "No, Miss McNamara, it is bad. You know that. That's why you sought help. Have you tried breaking up with him?"
"Once."
Her eyes grew bright and wet.
"I shouldn't be talking to you. I shouldn't be here."
"What did he do when you left him?" She swallowed and stared at the cookie crumbs on the plate.
"He found me. He'll always find me. He doesn't want me to leave. Going would be suicide. I know it."
"Have you considered filing a restraining order?"
"How can I? We live together."
"Still?" I didn't understand, but no one could unless they were in that position. A fire ignited inside of her.
"You don't get it. We've been together for a long time. He is my everything. I barely scrape by. I work in a place just like this. I can't afford rent or utilities. I don't have any family here. The friends I had are gone now. I have nowhere else to go, and even if I did, I wouldn't survive without him."
He chipped away at your other connections. I didn't need her answer. I knew enough to know this is how situations like this started. The abuser craved a sense of power and control over the abused, even though the reason for his behavior was often because of his own fear and insecurities. He wanted her alone, and all to himself. He needed to be needed, so he created the ideal situation to make that happen. Honestly, I didn't give a shit about the psychology. I just wanted to break the cycle in this guy's face. There are resources available to you. I scrolled through my contacts, jotting down names and numbers as I went.
"He's a cop. There's no place I can go where he can't find me."
I disagree, but we aren't there yet. I watched her nibble on the end of the cookie. Before this goes any further, I need to ask you something.
"What?"
Are you prepared to leave him for good?
"I don't see how I can."
Don't worry about the logistics. I just need to know if you're done with him. You came to my office, but I get the sense you might not be ready. Until you are, there's nothing anyone can do to help you. It was the hard truth. I wouldn't lie or sugarcoat things. She had to commit to this. If she couldn't, there was no point. And I didn't have the time or resources to waste if she intended to run back to him in a few days or weeks. Do you still love him?
"No. I haven't for a long time. Honestly, I think I hate him. Last night he came home drunk, angry, and..."
She took an unsteady breath, tears welling in her eyes, though she wouldn't let them fall.
"Looking for a fight. I said something stupid about not wanting to put up with his shit anymore, and that set him off.
She fought to hold back the emotions.
Pulled his gun on me and said he'd kill me if I ever leave him."
Chapter 3. I had to be smart about this. Every cell in my body wanted to march into the police station and beat the shit out of Sergeant Scott Renwin, but a frontal assault would only lead to more problems, and I was in the business of solving problems, not creating them. A framed photo stood on the mantel, and I picked it up. The two of them were at the beach. Jade was laughing as a wave crashed down around them. She was beautiful, with alabaster skin, fiery red hair, and sharp teal eyes. Renwin wasn't anything special, which I should have realized in the coffee shop when she said what initially drew her to him was his sense of humor. That spoke volumes for his looks. What did a woman like her ever see in a guy like him?
"He'll know I left."
Jade tossed another item into her duffel bag.
"Especially after our fight last night. As soon as he gets home, he'll start looking for me. How long do you think it'll take him to find me when he has the entire police department at his disposal? A few hours, maybe?"
That's why you're leaving a note saying your aunt unexpectedly took ill and you had to go to her. Once we get your things packed and clear out, you should call him and tell him about your unexpected trip.
"You want me to talk to him?"
You don't have to. We'll do whatever you think is best. I reread the brief message she had written and hung it on the fridge. We just need to buy a little time to get everything squared away.
"Before he comes looking for me."
She sighed.
"He's not stupid. He's going to see right through this. He's going to find me, Lucien, and he's going to kill me."
She gulped down some air and stopped packing. Her hands shook.
"I can't do this. I can't."
Maybe this was a terrible idea, but staying with him wasn't a good idea either. I searched the kitchen drawers for a paper bag and folded over the sides. "Breathe into this. You don't want to pass out. Just slow breaths in and out." I had never seen anyone hyperventilate before, but I had seen the bag trick on TV shows. Hopefully that wasn't creative licensing. I rubbed her back softly, aware of the way she stiffened at the physical contact. I was out of my depth. Pulling out my phone, I dialed one of the area women's shelters and stepped into the other room. Since I was no expert, I would defer to someone who knew what to do.
"Who are you calling?"
Jade asked when she finally calmed down enough to speak. "The domestic abuse hotline." Her already pale skin went stark white.
"I can't go to one of those places. I told you Scott's a cop. That's the first place he'll look. He'll find me there. You can't take me to one of those places. I won't go."
I put the phone down and held up my palms. "I know. I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget to take something you might need later. You need financial documents, your bank account information, your credit history, social security card, insurance cards, IDs." I studied her. "Did he take any of those things away from you?" According to the woman on the phone, the abuser often turned his victim into a captive.
"No."
"All right, that's good. That'll make this easier." Though Scott didn't have to resort to those measures since he had a lot more resources at his disposal. He could probably trace her cell phone or have someone pull up the GPS anti-theft tracking info on her vehicle. "As soon as we leave here, I'll get you a new cell phone, and I'll rent you a car at the airport."
"Where am I going to stay? What about work? I can't just skip town."
"Call in and tell them you have a family emergency. If they need documentation or proof, I'll get it for you."
"How?"
"Don't worry about that." I offered a reassuring smile. She finished packing her clothes and toiletries and whatever sentimental heirlooms she had. "How much of this furniture is yours?"
"Just the futon and that bookcase."
"What about the appliances? Or the TV?" She pointed to a small set on the kitchen counter.
"That's mine."
"I'll buy you a new one once you get settled. What about the computer?"
"My laptop died 3 months ago. Scott's been letting me use his."
"Did you do any research on his computer that might be damning or lead him to believe the note is a lie?" She shook her head. "Where does your family live?"
"My dad's in Maryland. My mom's in Colorado."
"Does Scott know that?"
"I think so."
"Okay." I turned on the computer, searching for flight information. Then I looked up information on ischemic strokes and left the window minimized. With any luck, Scott would believe the lie. Since Jade had family in Maryland, I didn't want to risk leading Scott to them. So I checked flights to Portland, Maine. It might be enough to confuse him, or at least delay him, since they were both M states. "So, this is everything?" I stared at the 6 duffel bags and 2 boxes.
"When I moved here, I only took what fit inside my car. My campus apartment came pre-furnished, and when I graduated, I moved in with Scott."
The look in her eye told me she regretted that decision. She probably regretted ever coming to the city. "Does he have access to your bank account?" She shook her head.
"No, we've always had separate accounts. He bought whatever we needed."
"Did you chip in on the rent?"
"He knew I didn't make enough for that. He said he wanted to take care of me."
She snorted, her face dropping, and she glared at the recliner.
"Asshole."
I checked the time. According to Jade, Scott wouldn't be home for hours, but I wanted to get Jade as far away from here as quickly as possible. "I'll load the car. Stay here until I'm done." For all I knew, Scott might have neighbors keeping watch. I didn't spot any surveillance cameras or security systems inside the apartment, but I couldn't be too careful. 3 trips later, I poked my head into the apartment. "Are you ready?" She nodded, locking the door behind her and following me to the car. Once we were on the road, she let out the breath she'd been holding since we stepped foot inside the apartment.
What comes next?
That's what I'd been asking myself this entire time. First, we pick up your car and go to the airport. You're going to buy a plane ticket to Aunt Bonnie's. I saw the panic on her face. Flights were expensive, and she didn't have the money to waste, especially to travel to see a fictitious aunt. I'll reimburse you. Just put it on your credit card in case Scott runs your financials. Once you get your plane ticket, I'll rent a car for you in my name. While I'm doing that, use the ATM to withdraw whatever cash you have remaining in your account. You won't be able to use your credit or debit cards after that. I kept some emergency cash in a safe at the office. It would be enough to get her started. I pointed to the cell phone she held tightly in her hand. Don't forget to call work.
Right.
Dazed, she lifted the phone and repeated the lie to her boss, since that would be the first place Scott would go to verify her story. Overwhelmed, she hung up.
Shouldn't I feel relieved?
You will once you realize you're free. This is the hard part. It should get easier after this. Right now, we just have to make sure you're safe, and he can't find you. Chapter 4. After leaving the airport, I brought Jade back to the office, handed her $200 in cash, and made some calls. She needed a safe place to stay, a place where Scott and the rest of his cop buddies wouldn't think to look for her. One day, Cross Security and Investigations would be equipped to deal with these types of situations, but my company wasn't there yet. Maybe I should have passed her off to someone more experienced, but I thought I could handle it. Now, I wasn't so sure. Jade fidgeted.
You know, I spoke to a few other private eyes in the past. I didn't know where to go and thought, they could help. But they always passed me off to battered women's shelters or simply refused to take my case after they found out Scott was a police sergeant. Why aren't you doing the same thing?
I'm not that smart. I hung up the phone, relieved to have found shelter for Jade on such short notice. Come on. I stared through the windshield at the apartment building. Having a few friends in real estate made securing a place easier. Unfortunately, it didn't offer much in terms of security. The front door automatically locked, and visitors had to be buzzed in. But that was the extent of it. If Scott located her, he'd flash his badge and get inside the building. No one could stop him. I unlocked the door and handed Jade the extra set of keys. Here we are. She stepped inside, looking around the empty apartment.
I don't know.
It's fine. Let me get the rest of your things. Stay here and stay out of sight. On my way outside, I checked my messages. My assistant performed a background check on Jade to make sure she was who she claimed. Although I believed her story, I wasn't naive enough to think I couldn't be conned by a damsel in distress. Wasn't that the plot of more than half the noir films I'd seen? Plus, certain people wanted me to fail. They wanted my latest endeavor to crash and burn, and this could be a creative way of making it happen. Or I was just paranoid. Reassured Jade was as she appeared, I grabbed the rest of her belongings and locked the car. I rented the apartment under one of my LLCs to make it harder to trace. The rental car was under my name, so even if Scott came looking for her, he wouldn't find her. And I doubted he'd think to come after me. According to Jade, she saw an ad I had taken out on the back cover of a business magazine while at work and decided to stop by. No connection existed between the two of us, so Scott would never be the wiser. A medic needs to look at you. I put her boxes near the door. We need documented proof of the abuse.
No.
She bit her lip and looked away.
I don't want that.
We need it, I insisted. It's bad enough there isn't a paper trail to establish repeat behavior, but one assault is more than enough.
Yeah, but Scott knows people. He's friends with a lot of the other first responders, paramedics, EMTs, even some of the people who work in the emergency room. He'll deny it, and they'll believe him.
No, they won't. But I didn't know if that was true. I know some people who have used concierge medicine in the past. Let me see if I can get a name. I doubt any of those doctors rub elbows with law enforcement or first responders.
How do you know so many people? Who are you? Long-lost heir to the Rockefeller fortune?
I wish, but I'm just your average Joe.
Somehow, I doubt that.
Even though Jade had warmed to me, She kept her distance, wouldn't look me in the eye. She took her things and piled them in the corner, positioning herself near them like a dog guarding a bone. And I realized those material possessions were all she had left in the world. After making some calls, several to my assistant, I put down the phone. Furniture will be here tomorrow. Justin's bringing an air mattress and some freshly washed linens and towels for tonight. Grocery delivery is on the way. I just ordered basic staples. I didn't know if you were vegan.
I'm not.
Okay. I opened a cabinet, finding it empty. I also ordered a set of stainless steel cookware, serving for 4, dish soap, sponges, and things like that. You know, the basics. Tomorrow, you can make a list of whatever else you need, and I'll have someone deliver it to you. You have the car for emergencies, but I'd prefer if you stay here, at least for now. She nodded, toying with the zipper on one of the duffel bags.
How long am I supposed to stay out of sight?
I didn't have an answer. I contacted a law firm, Reeves and Almeida. Have you heard of them? She shook her head. They take a lot of criminal cases. They know the ins and outs of the law. Mr. Almeida will meet with us tomorrow to go over your case.
My case?
Yes. Scott needs to know you mean business, and that he can't just push you around. Mr. Almeida will go over the steps you should take. Listen to him. Jade sniffled.
I don't know. This is a mistake. I made a mistake. I shouldn't be here.
She looked at the cheap Timex on her wrist.
Maybe there's still time. I can go home. Put everything back where it was. He won't know.
You can. Pushing her wasn't the answer. But what happens if he comes home drunk? Or angry? What happens if you say something that sets him off? What is he going to do next time? I studied her, the way she cowered and trembled. I'd seen people act like that before. It signaled the body was going into fight or flight. It's up to you, Jade. It's your life, your decision. Lots of abused individuals never leave their abusers. I'm not telling you should, though my actions spoke much louder than my words. It's your call. You know how dangerous Scott is. You have to do what's best for you. She looked up at me.
He will kill me one of these days, but being here gives him an excuse to do it sooner rather than later.
I won't let him hurt you. He won't find you, and by the time he knows what's going on, he won't be in a position to hurt anyone ever again.
Do you promise?
Yes. She thought long and hard about everything, and then she cried. Chapter 5. I slammed my palm against the steering wheel and blew into my closed fist, hoping to calm down. Right now, I felt like I might explode. I wanted to march into the police station and show Scott Renwin exactly what it felt like to be powerless and scared. But I wasn't crazy. Instead, I waited in my car, staring at the clunky pickup. Obviously, Scott felt like a little man. That's why he needed to drive a big, powerful vehicle, and why he thought it was a good idea to beat up on the weak. It might have also been what originally attracted him to join the police force. He craved power and authority. He didn't want to feel small or helpless, but by the time I was through with him, that's all he'd be. At shift change, several officers, no longer in uniform, exited from the rear door. I spotted Scott, his face indelibly etched in my brain. He slapped one of his pals on the back, hollered something about meeting at KC's, and climbed into his truck. Revving the engine, he peeled out of the parking lot. You smug asshole. Checking the screen mounted to my dash, I watched the steady red blip move down the orange line. After his buddies drove off, I followed the tracker to the bar. When I arrived at KC's, that eyesore of a truck caught my attention. I only recognized one other car from the police parking lot. Regardless, it was a cop bar, so starting a fight with a cop in front of a few dozen of his brothers in blue would result in unnecessary bloodshed. As in, my blood would be unnecessarily shed. Though the prospect might make Jade's claims more believable, it would tip our hand, and I didn't want to do that. I stepped inside, squinting in the dim light. The bulk of the illumination came from the neon signs hanging behind the bar. I kept my eyes on the bartender, a grizzled retired police lieutenant named Jim Harrelson. Scott leaned against one of the high tops, sipping his beer. The foam left a white mustache on his upper lip.
"Hey, kid, what'll it be?"
Jim asked. I cleared my throat, my left eyebrow twitching. It had been a while since I stepped foot inside this place, but Jim didn't miss a trick. He remembered me. Gin. Jim put down a glass, poured my preferred brand, and slid it toward me.
"You looking for your pops?"
"Is he here?"
"Nope. Hasn't been for a while."
I slid onto the stool, keeping an eye on Scott by using the reflection provided by the mirrored back wall.
"He thinks he's too good for a place like this."
Jim shrugged.
"I don't have a beef with your pops."
"That makes one of us." The bartender didn't say anything. He wiped off the counter and moved to the other end to talk with some regulars. I hated this place. It made me twitchy and uncomfortable, and bad things happened whenever I got too twitchy. That was partially the reason I wasn't managing seven-figure accounts or trading on the floor anymore. A glass broke, and I blinked, unsure if it just happened or if I was remembering the sound of sending my boss's desk chair careening through the window. I turned on my stool, finding a waitress kneeling down to pick up the shards. My gaze traveled up to Scott, who scowled while staring down at her. His fists involuntarily clenched. Jim grabbed a broom and dustpan and stepped out from behind the bar to help her clean it up. From here, I couldn't make out their words, but the waitress hurried around the bar, filled a glass, and brought it back to Scott. He took it, nodded at the waitress, and turned back to the dartboard. Due to the angle, I didn't see exactly what happened, but from the annoyed look on the waitress's face, I suspected Scott had done something to cause her to drop the glass. Scott's buddy laughed, slinging his arm around Scott's shoulder and clearly joking about something. Eventually, the pinched look disappeared from the bastard's face. He chugged down the rest of the beer, signaled to Jim, who was now back behind the bar for another, and approached the dartboard. For the next 20 minutes, I watched Scott and his friend take turns plucking the darts out of the board, throw them with terrible precision, and repeat the process until they ran out of beer. Scott looked at his watch, said his good nights, and paid his tab. The asshole walked right past me, never noticing me, and clueless to the fact his entire world was about to turn upside down. Once I was sure he was gone and wasn't coming back, I cornered the waitress when she took the trash out. "Hey, is everything okay?" She narrowed her eyes, confused.
"Sure."
She glanced at the open side door, figuring if she screamed, a dozen off-duty cops would rush to her rescue. Admittedly, she wasn't wrong, which meant I needed to make sure she didn't scream. I noticed the incident inside, but I didn't see what happened. "Did Sergeant Renwin do something to you?" Her gaze traveled up and down my body. I didn't have a badge or a gun, like most of the guys inside.
"Why do you ask?"
"Just curious." She shook it off.
"It's nothing new."
"What does that mean?"
"Hey, come on."
She looked uncertainly back at the door.
"It's nothing. Guys blow off steam. They think they're funny or cute. They want to show off to their friends. That's it."
"What did he do?" My voice sounded hard like granite.
"He slapped my ass."
"Has he done it before?"
"Half the guys in there have done it before. It's nothing. But I wasn't expecting it. I got startled and dropped the beer. Enough said."
Suddenly, something dawned on her.
"Are you investigating Scott?"
She scrutinized me more carefully, probably assuming I was with internal affairs. However, I doubted they dressed this nicely. They couldn't afford it on their salaries unless they were on the take, which would defeat the entire purpose of IA. Perhaps. Can you think of any reason why someone should?
"Nope."
She slammed the lid on the dumpster.
"Just be careful around here, Detective. No one likes a rat."
She went back inside. Realizing I made more of an impression than I intended, I got into my car and followed the red blip on my monitor back to Scott Renwyn's apartment, wondering if she'd tell him about me the next time he stopped by for a drink. I parked halfway down the street, reached for my camera and the directional mic, and took a few snapshots while Scott threw a temper tantrum. I missed the initial explosion when he first arrived home and found Jade's note, but I knew there must have been one. He was a powder keg. It didn't take much to set him off. And I knew, after tonight, we were on a collision course. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 6. I forwarded Jade's calls to my phone since her cell phone was in the airport parking lot. Since finding the note, Scott had called 7 times. I listened to the messages again, desperate, pleading, and angry. At first, he sounded concerned. He wanted to know where she was, when she'd be back, and what family member had fallen ill. He probably intended to drag her home, kicking and screaming. I didn't like it. I didn't like any of this. According to the tracker I planted on Scott's rear bumper, he was at work now. But given the number of unreturned calls and texts, I didn't doubt he'd illegally used police resources to track her phone, her car, and her. I just hoped I'd covered all my bases. "Mr. Cross?" I looked up, tucking the phone back into my pocket. "Sorry." The receptionist waved away my apology. "Please, if I had a dime for every time a client's been on the phone, I'd have millions." She jerked her head at her boss's office. "Mr. Almeida would like you to join them." "Thanks." I stepped into the corner office, eyeing Jade, who was curled up on one end of the couch. "How's it going in here?" Mr. Almeida sighed. For an attorney, that was a bad sign.
"It could be better, but I've seen worse. Ms. McNamara clearly has a case. The first thing we need to do is file a restraining order."
Almeida's gaze flicked to Jade, who hugged her knees to her chest and stared at the floor.
"Like I said, Scott Renwyn won't be allowed within 500 feet of you. That includes where you work, shop, eat, everything. If he violates the court order, he'll be held in criminal contempt and could be arrested. As I'm sure Mr. Cross has explained, the police department takes allegations of domestic abuse seriously. It's unlikely he'd risk opening himself up to an internal investigation by violating the terms of the court order."
"What if he doesn't care? What's to stop him from hurting me?"
Jade asked.
"You'll have legal recourse,"
Almeida said, but that didn't satisfy her. I doubted that answer would satisfy anyone in her position. "I will stop him." I glanced over at Almeida, who was not pleased by my comment, but he'd already gone over the legal ramifications with her until he was blue in the face. A piece of paper wouldn't protect her from Scott's wrath, and she wanted assurances these measures would keep her safe. "I specialize in security. Someone will keep an eye out when you return to work. Scott won't get near you. I'll make sure of it."
"You don't need to worry about that," Almeida said. "You left safely. We'll get you set up with a post office box, since addresses have to be on official court documents. Are you planning on staying here? Do you want to leave town? What do you want to do?"
Jade blinked.
"I don't know."
"Okay, that's okay. You have time to think about it." I turned back to Almeida. "What happens to Scott?" Once approved, the restraining order would prohibit Scott from possessing a firearm, thus making it unlikely he'd be able to keep his job. The bastard fucked himself over when he decided it was okay to hit a woman. Unfortunately, that meant Jade's claims and case could cost Scott everything.
"I don't see why we would have any problems getting the restraining order, and I doubt we'll encounter any issues at the hearing. Of course, like I explained to Ms. McNamara, the restraining order won't go into effect until after the hearing. We could request a temporary order of protection until then. The department will probably start its own investigation into Jade's allegations once that's filed."
"Let's do that." I reached for my phone. "Send me a list of what we need to do in order to keep her hidden."
"No problem."
Almeida made a note. "What about pursuing criminal charges?" I asked. Almeida looked at Jade.
"Maybe you should talk to her about that."
I glared at the attorney. I asked you a question. I'd like an answer. Almeida snorted. He knew me well enough not to take offense.
The evidence is flimsy. No witnesses, no history of reported incidents, no hospital records or police reports to corroborate her claims, no neighbors calling to report anything suspicious. We have nothing except the doctor's report from last night and her word against his. He's a cop. Depending on what his record shows, the court is likely to find in his favor. The department might even find in his favor, so if he's willing to play by the rules, we might not need to take this further than a TRO. It'll depend on how vindictive Mr. Renwyn chooses to be.
Jade shivered.
I don't know what he'll do.
That's okay. Everything's going to be okay. Though I said the words, they sounded like hollow platitudes. This can't be the first time he's done this. Others will come forward. Almeida shrugged.
Digging into Renwyn's background is in your wheelhouse, so I'll leave that up to you. I just want him to leave me alone. I don't want to push his buttons or piss him off. I just want us to go our separate ways, Jade said. I don't want to see him behind bars. I can't imagine that would be good for a police sergeant.
It wouldn't, which is why he will think twice before hurting you again. I couldn't help thinking maybe she wasn't as over him as she claimed to be. Or she was a lot more forgiving than I was. My mind drifted to the waitress from last night. Renwyn must have a history of violence and abuse. It was my job to dig it up.
Until you learn more and we get the ball rolling on filing court orders and getting a hearing on the books, the best thing I can tell you is to hurry up and wait, Almeida said. You've taken the right first steps, Miss McNamara.
He glanced at me.
Mr. Cross might be new at this, but he knows his way around bypassing the system and dealing with criminal matters. I'd say you're in good hands.
Jade didn't appear to have heard a single word he said. She looked paler than usual.
I don't feel so well. Do you mind if I use your bathroom?
Almeida pointed to a door visible through his glass office, and she ducked out, one hand clutching her stomach.
Nerves, Almeida surmised. She's lucky. Based on her medical records and the report your doctor wrote, she hasn't suffered any permanent physical damage.
She's not lucky. He's just careful. I started out the door, fearing she might sneak out or bolt.
Lucien?
Almeida's tone caught my full attention.
Let her do what she wants and what makes her comfortable. It's her life and her mistakes to make.
She can't go back to him.
I don't think she will. I've seen far too many cases like this. The ones who escape are determined. And she is. When you light a fire under her, you can see it, the determination, the grit. She'll get away, but she has to do it on her terms, not yours.
He clapped me on the shoulder.
Don't make your issues into her issues. She already has enough problems. Though I am wondering why you decided to take this on. This isn't exactly your kind of case or client. You won't make a dime off this thing. If anything, you stand to lose quite a bit. Your company could crash and burn before it even gets off the ground. Are you prepared for that?
It's not always about the money. Don't you ever do anything pro bono?
Yes, and those are always the ones that bite me in the ass.
Chapter 7.
Now what?
Jade asked. Now, we wait. I looked at the array of furniture that had been delivered while we were out and gave her Justin's number. If you need anything else, text my assistant. He'll get back to you within the hour.
Where are you going?
I turned, unsure if she was afraid to stay by herself. You're safe? You didn't have any problems last night after I left, did you?
It's not that.
She took a seat at the kitchen table.
I just don't know what to do.
I'm sure you'll figure something out, but please don't leave the apartment until after the hearing.
Yeah, okay.
I offered an encouraging smile. Like I said, if you need something, Justin will bring it to you. You met him yesterday. He was the guy messing with the phones.
Right.
Okay, I'll be in touch if you have any questions.
Can I call you?
She asked, a begging quality to her tone that pulled at something inside of me. Of course, she smiled.
I'll see you later.
Confused by the exchange, I wrote it off as a hazard of working with non-corporate entities and returned to the car. This case was personal to Jade, and to me, too. Though I wasn't entirely sure why I found myself so invested. It didn't matter. What mattered was keeping Scott Renwyn from hurting Jade or anyone else. And the first place to start was the precinct. Before stepping foot inside, I checked the time. My mouth went dry. My stomach muscles clenched. Sucking it up, I pulled on the door handle and entered the police station. A couple of people were speaking to an officer and a detective in the back corner. I ignored them and approached the desk. The white-haired desk sergeant absently hummed as she pecked away at the keys. I cleared my throat, waiting for her to look up.
Just a sec,
she said. The ancient printer on the counter behind her beeped and devoured the blank paper from the tray, spitting it back out a second later. She picked it up, stamped it, and stuck it in a folder before looking up. Are you ready yet, or should I come back? A smile tugged at her lips.
Lucien, quit sassing your elders.
She put her hands on the counter and stared at me.
Look at you in that fancy suit. Have you gotten taller?
She leaned over the counter to look at my shoes. What are you doing?
Just wondering if you're wearing lifts.
Come on, Sarah. Do you really think I need another inch or two? She quirked an eyebrow at me. The answer is no. I glared at her, even though I had nothing but affection for the woman. She straightened.
You look good. I don't think I've seen you since your academy days. When was that? 3 years ago?
She sobered.
Tough break. But it looks like it worked out for the best. Last I heard, you were doing something with stocks.
Her forehead crinkled.
At least you put those computer science and economics degrees to use.
Unfortunately, I'm not doing that anymore either. I got blackballed after squealing on my boss for embezzling, among other things.
I'm surprised the SEC didn't offer you a job.
Why would they? I have a record.
I thought the assault was expunged.
Still.
Cut the crap. I don't want to hear any of this woe is me bullshit. You wouldn't be dressed like that if life was crap. Did you come back just to rub it in our faces?
I wouldn't do that. She snorted.
Who the hell are you kidding?
I tilted my head to the side, considering her words.
Well,
I wouldn't do that to you. She stared at me for a moment before accepting it as true. I had plenty of reasons to despise the police department, but Sergeant Sarah Rostakowski was a good and decent woman. I wouldn't take my bias out on her just because she wore a uniform. She crooked her finger like she wanted to tell me a secret.
You were always too good for the uniform, Lucien. Even if you made it through the academy, you wouldn't have stuck around long. The feds would have swooped in and stolen you the first chance they got.
Whatever. She growled deep in her throat.
Regardless, you're definitely too good to be rubbing elbows with snakes and weasels on Wall Street. Your father wants better for you. So what are you doing now? What brings you here today?
I scoffed and stared at the recruitment poster on the wall. Lies. It was nothing more than propaganda and lies. The police department claimed to have standards, but they let assholes like Scott Renwyn into their ranks. My blood pressure spiked, and I shoved my hands into my pockets before they turned into fists. Security and investigations.
Private?
Yes.
Where are you working?
Cross Security and Investigations. The smugness crept into my voice. She whistled.
Bet your father loves that.
He doesn't know. Shifty-eyed, I stepped closer to the desk and lowered my voice. I could use your help. I need a favor. She glanced around and leaned closer.
What do you need?
Sergeant Scott Renwyn's records. Anything you can find. Civilian complaints, evaluations, a psych profile. I'll take whatever you have.
You're investigating a cop. Are you insane? What do you think this guy did?
I licked my lips. I didn't want to say.
Will you help me? No one can know about this."
"Damn right no one can know about this. I don't need my ass in a sling."
She made sure no one was within earshot.
"But I'll see what I can do. Where can I send the records?"
I picked up a pen and wrote down instructions on how to access my online Dropbox. She tucked the note into her pocket and patted me on the shoulder.
"Be careful, kid. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but it sounds like you're playing with fire. Your old man won't like it."
I don't need his approval. I shook off the resentment. "Take care of yourself, Sarah. This place does things to good people."
"Maybe that's why I'm sticking around," she grinned. "Someone has to keep these officers and detectives in line."
Truer words. I went back to the car and deflated in the seat. Aside from hacking into the police servers, I had done everything I could to get Renwyn's service records. Sarah would do her best. In the meantime, I'd find whatever dirt I could on Renwyn. Chapter 8. Rubbing a hand down my face, I stared at the computer screen. It had taken quite a bit of work, and more effort than necessary, but I found plenty on Scott Renwyn. I knew where he was born, who his best friend was in kindergarten, his GPA in high school, how he paid someone to write his college essays for him, and how he scraped by until he was accepted into the police academy. None of that was useful. I dug deeper until I compiled a list of women he dated over the years, from high school until now. None of them ever filed a report or took out a TRO or protection order against him. I sent the list to my assistant, hoping he might convince one of the women to give up some dirt I missed. As far as I could tell, Jade was the first woman he lived with, besides his mother. I spoke to Mrs. Renwyn, but she only had the fondest things to say about her son. When I asked about her late husband, she said he was a good provider, which read to me like he'd used his wife, and maybe Scott, as a punching bag, but I didn't have any proof, though it would explain the cycle of violence. Damn it. I picked up Scott's bank account information. He had enough to be comfortable without raising any eyebrows. His monthly expenses didn't fluctuate, aside from the occasional unexpected purchase, like new tires for his truck. From what I could tell, he didn't do much except work, drink, and beat up Jade. Scott kept a low profile, which would make things more difficult. Right now, it was her word against his. But I knew Scott had done this before. This couldn't be the first time, and if someone didn't put an end to his reign of terror, it wouldn't be the last. Dialing Almeda, I put the phone on speaker and stared out my door into the reception area. My receptionist had been on the phone most of the day, scheduling interviews and appointments. Cross Security had been in the midst of hiring computer experts and a platoon of security specialists when Jade walked into my life. I needed to get at least 8 security specialists who could work guard duty, and 2 or 3 computer techs before signing contracts with my corporate clients on Monday. Now wasn't the time to take a domestic abuse case. I was already hemorrhaging money, and Jade McNamara wasn't even a paying client. "What the fuck are you doing, Lucien?" I muttered.
"Shouldn't I ask you that?"
Almeda said, having answered some time during my internal monologue. "Probably." I filled the attorney in on the progress I made. "What have you found on your end? Did you discover anything substantial to hold against Renwyn?"
"Cross, you aren't listening. Ms. McNamara doesn't want to pursue criminal charges. She doesn't want to file any additional claims against her boyfriend. She just wants him to leave her alone. She only wants a restraining order and assurances he won't violate it. This might never go beyond a TRO. Frankly, that would probably be in everyone's best interest. It would allow Renwyn the greatest chance of keeping his job, and Ms. McNamara can move on. As long as he has something to lose, he'll be less likely to violate the court order."
"But this is how we make sure he doesn't violate it," I said, exasperated.
"You're going to blackmail him into submission? That's your plan?"
I hadn't thought of it in those terms. He needs to know if he touches her again, his life will blow up.
"That's a guarantee if he violates the court order," Almeda said patiently. "The mailbox is set up. I have the paperwork ready to go. I'll send it out in the morning."
Okay. Almeida didn't hang up.
Your okay doesn't sound very okay.
I said okay. Annoyed, I disconnected. According to the tracker, Renwin's truck was at the precinct. Since he had a steady schedule, I had time to do more digging. So I went back to KC's. The place was crowded with men and women who'd come off second shift, but I found an empty seat in the corner. Jim looked surprised to see me again.
We don't stock the best quality gin here.
Tell me about it. I watched as he poured from a bottle.
If you're planning on making this your usual haunt, you better let me know. I'll order something that won't burn the hair off your chest, he smirked. Although a pretty boy like you probably manscapes.
I didn't know you knew words like manscape. He shoved the glass towards me.
So, is this gonna be a regular thing?
If it is, I'll switch to beer. Jim rolled his eyes.
Let me guess, you want a fancy import.
Is that the cop instinct I hear so much about? He glanced down the bar to make sure no one needed anything.
What are you doing here, Lucien? Melody said you were asking about Scott Renwin. She thinks you're heading an internal investigation.
I never said I was a cop. That would be illegal.
Like you give a shit about that?
His sigh sounded like a growl.
What the hell are you doing?
It doesn't concern you.
It's my bar. That makes it my concern.
He pointed to a sign on the back wall.
And I can refuse service to anyone.
I thought you were going to special order my preferred brand of gin. That doesn't sound like you're refusing service. I stared straight-faced at him. Is this because I drink imported beer? I didn't like asking for things, especially help, and I didn't know how to ask questions without tipping my hand. This was a bad idea.
You cocky shit. Answer the damn question.
I bit back the smart-ass response on my tongue. I didn't know where Jim Harrelson's loyalties lay. The waitress looked scared. Scott slapped her ass. I didn't like it, so I asked her about it. That was it.
He touched her?
According to her, a lot of the men have gotten out of hand a time or two. She doesn't appreciate it. Looks like you've created an unsafe work environment. I glanced at the other waitresses. I'm guessing the others probably have similar stories.
Yeah, but you asked specifically about Scott.
He's the only one I saw. Jim's eyes narrowed.
I'll keep an eye out and tell the staff to report inappropriate behavior immediately.
They probably won't say anything. It could impact their tips. But Jim was a dog with a bone.
How'd you know Scott's name?
Must have heard someone say it. I met him glare for glare. Since you're so hung up on the jerk, I'm wondering why. Does the bastard typically give you problems? Jim reached beneath the bar. For a moment, I wondered if he planned to pull out a shotgun and tell me to leave. But that would have been melodramatic, especially since he was practically my uncle. He slapped a magazine down on the bar, the back cover facing up with my Cross security ad staring at us.
Tell me what you've gotten yourself into, son.
Nothing.
Renwin drinks too much. I take his keys away at least twice a month. Most of the time, someone drives him home. One night, I found him passed out in the men's room. I called his girlfriend to come get him.
Jim studied my expression, but I remained impassive. I spent most of my life making sure my face never gave away anything, unless I wanted it to.
I helped her drag him out to the car. It was dark, so I might have been mistaken.
What did you see? He wiped the bar.
You need to be careful. You're not just fucking with a man's private life. He's a cop. Things like this could end his career.
Whatever happens, he did it to himself. People like that shouldn't be able to carry guns or terrorize the innocent.
I didn't say they should. All I said is you need to be careful. He won't like some private dick poking around in his business.
I don't care. I need to find evidence.
Scott's girl should be covered in it.
Nothing's ever been documented. No police reports or 911 calls. Scott could say someone else did it. I looked at Jim in a new light. Unless you happened to witness something.
Like I said, it was dark.
Bullshit. I drained the rest of the glass and flipped it over. It was time to leave. If this goes to court, we could subpoena you. Jim snorted.
I'm an unreliable witness.
So you won't help?
I didn't say that. I'm just saying I know how these things work.
Jim glanced around again, but no one was close to us.
You need to go to your pops. He'll take care of it.
I would rather be mauled by wild dogs. Chapter 9. For the next few days, I checked my Dropbox to the point of obsession and toyed with the idea of phoning Sarah. As a desk sergeant, she had access to a lot of information, and since she'd been with the department for more than 20 years, she could get me what I wanted. So why was my Dropbox empty? My phone chimed an alert, and I picked it up. Renwyn's truck was on the move. Scott had finally gotten tired of leaving frantic and slightly threatening voicemails and text messages and decided to go to the airport. Frankly, I was surprised it had taken him this long. He had every reason to be concerned about Jade's well-being, and that of her sick aunt, but after the initial messages he left, the situation devolved. The last 30 texts alternated between begging Jade to come back and threatening her with what he'd do if she didn't listen. That wasn't what a supportive partner should do, which told me one thing. He knew she left him, and he knew why. By now, he must have received notice of the impending court hearing and realized he was running out of time. If Jade didn't withdraw the claim, things would progress, and Scott's life would end up under the microscope. I grabbed my jacket and glanced down at the private investigator's license I'd received this afternoon. It had taken some cajoling to get the process expedited, but I was now licensed by the state. But on the off chance Scott confronted me, I didn't want him to know that. So, I left the wallet-sized card on my desk, asked the receptionist to redirect my calls to my cell, and told my assistant to conduct the rest of the interviews this afternoon. Then I slid behind the wheel and followed Scott to the airport. When I arrived, his giant truck was double-parked behind Jade's car. I slowed to the posted speed limit, flipped on my lights, and circled around until I found a space that allowed me to glimpse the level below. I cut the engine and reached for the camera beside me. Scott waited as a few more cars entered in search of long-term parking. When the coast was clear, he removed the coat hanger from inside his jacket and popped the lock. Obviously, he didn't have a set of keys to Jade's car. He slid into the front seat and found her cell phone in the cup holder. She told me that's where she normally kept it when driving, and he might think she forgot it. I watched him through the viewfinder as he attempted to turn on the dead phone, getting the dying battery signal before the device automatically powered off. After that, he searched the rest of her car, popped the trunk, and checked everywhere. I couldn't hear him from this distance, but I could read his lips. He cursed and swore. He slammed the trunk lid, rubbing a hand over his mouth. He went back into the car, pocketed her cell phone, and tapped anxiously on the dashboard. He knew she was gone. He also knew she'd be back. By now, he'd received notice of her intentions. If Jade pressed the issue for a permanent restraining order, and the judge ruled in her favor, Scott would be prohibited from possessing a firearm. He'd lose his job. He'd lose everything. And that's why he so desperately wanted to stop her. He didn't realize his actions only made things worse. With her cell phone in his pocket, he checked the car one last time before circling around the garage until he found a space. I remained inside my car, the camera hidden out of sight, while he stormed past. He hung his badge around his neck, and I waited until he entered the elevator before I got out of my car and took the stairs down, following him into the airport. While I browsed the newsstand, I kept an eye on him while he spoke to a ticket agent. He flashed his credentials. Eventually, airport security and TSA agents stepped in to assist. Law enforcement lived by a code, so after hearing Scott's sob story, they believed he was genuinely concerned about his girlfriend and shared her flight information and failure to board with him. Now he knew she hadn't left the city, and from the look on his face, the shit was about to hit the fan. He held it together, thanked them for their kindness, and left the airport. I bought a messenger bag, paid with the cash in my pocket, and checked the blip on my phone. Scott hadn't left yet. Donning my sunglasses, I took off my jacket, put it in the bag, and slipped it across my chest before exiting. The bastard stood just outside the sliding doors. He paced back and forth, squeezing Jade's phone in his hand. He didn't know what to do. I kept my head down and waited at the crosswalk. Once it was clear, I crossed the parking garage. Half a dozen people waited for the elevator, and I stood near them, shifting from foot to foot. When the doors opened, we squeezed inside. Right before the doors closed, a hand pushed against them. The doors automatically slid apart, and Scott entered. He sidestepped around the luggage, pressing in beside me. He gave me an odd look, but I left my sunglasses on, giving him a slight head nod. "It's good to be home, huh?" I mumbled. Scott didn't answer, losing interest in me as we waited for the doors to open. Once they did, he stepped out, along with 2 other people. I remained inside, watching him trudge toward his truck as the doors closed. They opened again a moment later, and I stepped out and circled around my car. By the time I got inside, Scott had pulled away. I called Almeda. He knows she's in the city.
"He received notice this morning."
That explains it. I stared at Jade's car. I'm on my way to the apartment to tell her what's going on. She needs to be prepared.
"Do you think Sergeant Renwin will be smart about this?"
Nothing about Scott's behavior led me to believe he ever made a smart decision, but he didn't have a record. No one ever filed any complaints against him, and, as far as I knew, all of his ex-girlfriends were alive and breathing. Hopefully, he'd do the right thing and let Jade go without putting up too much of a fight, but something told me he wouldn't. This will royally fuck him over. He wants to stop this before it buries him. That's why he's desperate to get her. We have to keep her safe. We have to keep him away from her.
"Do you think he wants to negotiate?" Almeda asked. "If he agrees to her terms behind closed doors, we can enter into an agreement that won't cost him his job."
It's too late for that. I remembered the fear in Jade's eyes when she talked about him. He's going to violate the terms the moment we turn our backs. I know it. Jade knows it. That's why she's so afraid.
"If you're right, this is going to get messy."
It already is. I hung up and headed to Jade's.